There were a few different phases for my chemo. The first phase was called the induction phase, and like it says in the name, the whole point of this phase was to induce remission, which was getting rid of the leukemia cells as quickly as possible. The chemo by itself wasn't going to be enough. My cancer was as stubborn as I am, and without any other treatments, it was going to keep coming back. So my doctor told me that the best chance I had at beating it and at long-term survival was with the stem cell transplant. This is another reason why I'm a huge fan of Kaiser, because stem cell transplants, especially from an unrelated donor, are ridiculously expensive. And they could have very well just told me to, try my luck out with the chemo, but they wanted what was best for me, which was a stem cell transplant. And I'll do a separate video just covering the cost of this whole treatment process. There's a few different medications that they can give for the first phase, and it mainly depends on the age and the overall health of the patient. Because I was so young and in general good health, they were able to give me the one medication that was going to give me the best chance at remission. But it was also the strongest one, and it was the most intense chemo that they had. Before we started the chemo, my doctor gave me a few really good pieces of advice. The first thing she said was that this entire thing is going to be a roller coaster, and there's going to be some really great highs and some really shitty lows, to kind of prepare myself for that. The next thing was to have faith, and I'm not saying you have to believe in a specific faith or believe in this God or that God, just have a general faith that everything is going to work itself out and that it's going to be fine in the end. The next thing was that you have to kind of keep a positive attitude, and I'm not saying you have to go around, yes, I have cancer, fuck yes, woo, let's party. No, none of that, but you have to kind of keep a positive attitude. It helps with everything. The only other thing I would add to that is that it's important to just take one day at a time. And before we started the chemo, they told me that what the process was going to be like, and the end goal was pretty much the transplant, which was 4 months away in November. And I remember thinking to myself that it's so far away, this November is never going to come, but it's been 5 years from that day, and it's been over 5 years actually, and it's crazy how quick time passes by. The treatment they gave me for the first phase of chemo was called the 7+3, and that's a combination of two different medications. The first is cytarabine, and the other one is daunorubicin. That's the Dawn that I'm talking about in the title. So the 7 refers to the amount of cytarabine that they were going to give me. They would mix the cytarabine in bags of IV solution. They would hang that up to infuse over 24 hours. So it was one bag every 24 hours, and they did this for seven days straight. That's the 7 and the 7+3. And normally the amount of medication is anywhere from 100 to 200 milligrams, and I think that's based off of weight. But because I was such a big boy back then, my dose was around 267. The 3 was for the daunorubicin, and this was for the first 3 days of the treatment. They would give it with an IV bolus, which is pretty much when the nurse pushes an IV medication through the IV at a quick rate, usually anywhere from 1 to 30 minutes for the whole infusion. And the reason they do that is because the quicker the medication goes in, the more effective it is, and usually the stronger the effect on your body. The daunorubicin, I used to call it daunorubicin either the devil's juice or Gatorade from hell, because that's exactly what it looked like. I mean, it was this red liquid that, if you watch cartoons or movies and you see those barrels with the radioactive symbol, this is probably the shit that was inside of it. And chemo in general is pretty toxic. So it's essentially poison that you're putting into your body to kill the poison that's already there. So you're pretty much fighting fire with fire. Just to give an idea on how toxic this shit is, when the nurses had the daunorubicin in their hands, first of all, the medication was sealed in a container. And when they were handling it, the nurses had to wear a special gown. We've seen a lot of it nowadays because of the pandemic. It's called PPE. They had to wear a special gown. They had to wear a special mask, I think, with special eye protection, and then not one but two sets of gloves. And at the time, my sister, I think, was 21 or 22, but she was at what's called childbearing age. They asked her to leave the room while they were infusing the medication. That's how toxic it was. It can affect her from across the room. And they were going to pump this straight into my heart. That's another thing I didn't mention in the last video, the PICC line that they put into my arm. The catheter goes from my arm all the way to the top to the opening of my heart, the right atrium. That's where blood flows into the heart. So the medication that they put in the IV goes straight to your heart to get pumped to the rest of your body. I didn't know it went that far in. I didn't find out until I think like a month or two later when one of my nurses told me. Can't remember if it was the first or second day of treatment, but I was feeling pretty good and I needed to go to the bathroom, and I don't know what on earth possessed me to stand and walk to the bathroom. I mean, I'm a guy, thankfully, and they gave me a urinal by the bed. I could have just whipped it out, done it in the urinal by the bed, but I decided to walk. On my way to the bathroom, I kind of decided to make a game for myself. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be the first patient to go through chemo without throwing up. I'm thinking this in my mind. I shit you not, the minute I got to the word without, started throwing up everywhere, on the floor, before I made it to the bathroom, in the sink. Just, it was a complete mess, vomiting my guts out. At the same time, one of my nurses from outside heard, and she came in, and at first I thought she was going to yell at me for throwing up because she was going to be the one to clean everything up. She told me that they need to measure the amount of fluids coming in and going out of my body, so she gave me one of those green vomit bags, and she told me to throw up in there so they can keep track of how much I'm vomiting. So she gave me the bag, and I was like, oh, okay. Even more into the bag, and it was like that for pretty much, I think, for like about a good week and a half after the chemo was done. And the daunorubicin was only for 3 days, but because of the color, I was pretty much pissing Hawaiian Punch for about a week.
That's Hawaiian Punch.
And like I said, they have to measure the amount of fluids that are coming out. So I had to pee in the urinal, and the nurses would come measure the pee, and they would write it down, and then they would flush it. My pee was so toxic that my nurses had to wear 2 sets of gloves while they were holding the container, and they had to wash the container thoroughly twice just to make sure it's sterile. And it's just crazy how toxic this is. That was pretty much my schedule for the next, I'm gonna say 2 weeks. I think it was basically poop, vomit, sleep, poop, vomit, sleep, like a newborn baby without the eating. Yeah, I didn't really eat much throughout the whole time.